Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be waiting for just 1 minute until everyone is in the room, and then we're going to get started. So I see more and more people joining us. Thank you so much for that. I guess, should we get started, Breen? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're all set to get started. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So once again, welcome everyone. I'm very excited to be presenting today for this monthly training of Climate Watch. We have a very special session today. Just jumping very quickly into the agenda. So we're going to take you on a journey all the way from the science of weather and climate attribution to how countries are preparing for the impacts of climate change in their policy documents, to what are the key targets that we need to address to prevent us from reaching extreme weather events and global warming above from what the Paris Agreement says. And for that, we're going to be presenting 3 different platforms joined by my colleagues. We're going to be hearing first from Climate Central, presented by Andrew Pershing. He's the Chief Program Officer and Vice President for Science at Climate Central. Then I'm going to get the floor and show the Climate Watch platform. And then we're going to be hearing from my colleague, Cathline Nagel, Senior Product Manager for System Change Lab. Just a few housekeeping items. This session, it's been recorded. We're going to be sharing the recording after the event. And we like to make this session as interactive as possible. So please, we're going to be covering a lot of information from all these 3 different platforms. So at any time you have a question, feel free to pop it out into the chat box, and we'll have plenty of time at the end of our presentation to address all of your comments. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Andrew. Stop sharing for a minute. Yep, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Leo, and I really appreciate the invitation to talk to this to your group here today. So I'm going to go over some of the tools that we have put together for how to do climate change attribution, motivated by the fact that this is, we just had the announcement a couple of days ago of like the hottest day ever in Earth's history, at least since humans have been measuring it. But before I get into it, what I want to do is talk just very quickly about why I think it's important to not only talk about attribution, but also to talk about climate change more importantly, why communications isn't a climate solution. So here's the map. This is from the Yale Program for Climate Change Communication with George Mason and UCSB, the survey that they do of the United States a couple of times a year. So 72% of people in the United States think global warming is happening. That's great. That is a big number. That's not something you hear a lot in the media. There's even a strong majority of people who want to see Congress doing more to address global warming, 62%. Now things start to get a little harder, right? Only 58% think global warming is caused by humans. So we're starting to see a gap in people's understanding. So that's a gap that, I think all of us have some role in trying to fill. And then things start to really fall off. And this is surprising to me, right? The number of people who have personally experienced the effects of global warming is only 44%. I would tell you that it is 100%. Everybody has experienced the effects of global warming, especially in a summer like this, and that's where attribution science really comes in. And then even worse is the number of people who discuss global warming at least occasionally, 36%, right? The map now is totally blue. It's almost the inverse of the people who believe in global warming. So people believe, they're concerned, they want to do something about it. They're not sure that they're experiencing it, but they really don't talk about it. And so this gets to a little bit of our theory that climate communication is a climate solution, and attribution science fills in that. And we have, it used to be when we were talking about the link between climate and weather, we were all taught that no single weather event can be linked to climate change. Attribution science has flipped that narrative. In 2004, 20 years ago, you had the first study that did a quantitative study linking a specific weather event, in this case, a 2003 deadly European heat wave, which, by the way, hit Paris at exactly the same time as the Olympics this year. So hopefully we won't get a repeat of that. But 20 years ago, the study did a quantitative analysis of how climate change made that heat wave more intense and more likely. Lots and lots of science since then. And by 2015, World Weather Attribution was formed in partnership with Climate Central to come out and do these rapid studies right after major weather events. And so they're able to do this very quickly after these events. Again, to take the toolkit that was developed by science, but to operationalize it for the purpose of public understanding of these events. And then 2016, you have a National Academy study in the US that kind of put a seal of approval on these rapid attribution strategies. And the National Academy is taking up attribution starting this year. So we think now the narrative is shifted, and it's not that no single weather event can be linked to climate change. It really is that climate change is an important factor in many weather events. And the question is just really, can we quantitatively pull that out? And we have real evidence that this is a valuable thing to do. To actually adding those numbers is incredibly valuable. So this is a study that Yale put out. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but if you add a quantitative statement similar to what I'm going to show you for our climate shift index tool, that it increases people's beliefs that climate change is affecting heat waves, it increases support for federal action, and it increases people's desire to talk about climate change. And it does it across party lines in the United States. Okay, so what can we attribute? Well, we can think of this axis of things that are hard to attribute and things that are easier, things where there's a weak level of attributability or strong. According to the IPCC report that was doing attribution on more of like the trend level, sort of global patterns, they sort of lay out this spectrum with wildfires being hard, precipitation and hurricanes, trends that we're seeing around the world in extreme precipitation. There's a reasonably high level of attributability that those trends are related to human-caused global warming. And then all the way on the east side, on the strong side, is temperature, right? Warming trends are the most, we have the strongest quantitative evidence that warming trends are related to carbon pollution in the atmosphere. We go now to weather events, this starts to shift. So temperature events still remain relatively easy, but other events get considerably harder. So it's not that we can't do it, it's just that it's harder to do. You're not going to necessarily be able to automate it. You're going to have somebody go in and diagnose things. And for example, wildfire is especially difficult because not only do you have heat, but you also have to have dryness, you have to have wind, you have to have something to burn, and you have to have something to start the fire. And so all of those factors have to come together, and it can be very hard to disentangle those things. But World Weather Attribution has done, a really nice job, for example, last year in doing an attribution study of the Canadian wildfire season. Okay, but I'm going to talk about temperature because that's where we have this very strong attributability and where Climate Central has been able to work with World Weather Attribution and others to actually automate how we do these calculations. So we were able to take a map like this, which was July 21, which was at the time the hottest day on planet Earth ever measured by humans, or probably the hottest day in about 150,000 years. And so we can look at the anomaly. So you can see that record was driven by unusually warm temperatures in Western North America and Canada and the US. Lots of unusual heat in Africa, very strong temperature anomalies across Southern Asia, essentially almost all of Asia. Norway's getting in on the action. Germany is getting in on the action. So there's a lot of heat popping off around the world. So this is the temperature anomaly, how much this temperature has changed relative to the recent 30-year average. But how much has climate change influenced those days' temperatures? That's where attribution science comes in. And so we bring in our climate shift index tool. So we are using computer models. We're also using data and observations to make these assessments every day in an automated way, where we can go and say that the heat in the Western US and in Canada had a very strong climate fingerprint. That heat was 5 times more likely because of climate change, which is the maximum on our scale. And you see how the big broad area of red going from Algeria all the way across the Middle East and Southern Asia over into China and even up into Russia, excuse me, that was 5 times more likely because of climate change. So we can really start to pull out the events and start to relate those to put them in the context of human-caused climate change. So that's what we have at the moment, our climate shift index tool, csi.climatecentral.org. But I want to give you just a sneak peek of a couple of other things that are coming out. One is that we're going to be launching ocean temperatures on August 14th. So there'll be an announcement coming out from our Climate Matters program about that. Ocean temperatures are really interesting. I'm an oceanographer. I love fish. I want us to be able to talk about, coral bleaching and attributability for things like, fisheries collapses and movements of different animals across the planet. But the reason we're doing this is because by attributing ocean temperatures, we think it actually brings hurricanes into the easy side. And we're going to be doing some additional work specifically on hurricanes. But even without that specific hurricane work, we think that this tool will allow meteorologists to talk about hurricanes in a new and different way this year. So for example, here's Hurricane Ian from 2022 on top of the ocean temperature anomaly. So warm areas are warmer than normal. Sorry, red are warmer than normal. Blue would be cooler than normal. And you can see the track line of the storm. And here's what our ocean climate shift index would look like. The scale is a little bit funky. I just want to zoom in on those blue boxes, which is where Hurricane Ian underwent rapid intensification and reached its maximum strength very, very quickly, which is an unusual behavior that we are seeing more and more in our climate-altered world. And those water temperatures were over 100 times more likely because of climate change. So we can say that the environment that hurricane grew up in, that fueled that explosive growth of that hurricane, was highly altered by climate change. So humans were influencing the trajectory, not the trajectory, influencing the strength of that storm. So in addition to work on specific hazards, we're releasing a variety of analyses and reports looking at health impacts and storms. We even have some work that's going to be coming out in a month or two on heat and gun violence and actually making attribution statements about that. So that was very quick. If you'd like to play along with the Climate Shift Index, you can see not only today's Climate Shift Index, but you can look ahead, I believe, 5 days. And I'll share these links in the chat, but we also have an alert system. And I would encourage you to sign up for our free Climate Matters bulletins. This is a weekly newsletter that comes out that highlights a particular climate story with localized information and graphics that can help you understand and communicate about climate change.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this very insightful presentation. Now I'm going to start sharing the screen again. Here we go. So what I want to do next is, now that we've learned more about the science of attribution and we've seen how much more likely all these changes in temperature are because of climate change, I want to take us one step further and see, okay, so these are the changes that are happening in the world. What is my country, or what is any country in particular doing in terms of their climate policies to address these changes in the weather? And so for that, I want to be presenting the Climate Watch platform. And so before I jump into a live demo, showing 2 or 3 things that I think will be the most helpful for the audience today, I want to quickly talk about the World Resources Institute. So Climate Watch is a data platform that gathers all the climate commitments around the world. But we also have a couple other data platforms, such as Season Change Lab, which we're also going to be hearing more about today, and other very famous platforms such as Global Forest Watch or Aqueduct, where users can explore more data about almost real-time fires in forests or water risks. So I invite you to explore these platforms from WRI as well. Now, very quickly, last slide before jumping into the live demo. When I mentioned climate commitments, what I meant is basically the key policy documents that countries have where they summarize all their actions to limit global warming. And that takes me back to the Paris Agreement, which is this legally binding document where all countries in the world committed to reduce global warming to this goal of reducing the worst effects of climate change to 1.5 degree of temperature increase compared to pre-industrial levels. The way that the Paris Agreement works, it's by countries submitting their nationally determined contributions every 5 years. That means that countries nationally determine what are the commitments and targets that they're going to set for themselves to limit global warming. And the way that it works is that every 5 years, they commit to submit a new version of it. And the idea of all this mechanism is really that every subsequent submission of the document, it's going to be a more ambitious one, so that we globally get to this goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Now, in addition to the NDCs, the Paris Agreement invites countries to submit a long-term strategy, which is another document that highlights a longer-term horizon and helps as a guideline for the NDCs, and also to show what's the direction that the country is aiming to take. And finally, in addition to the NDCs and the long-term strategies, the Paris Agreement is also inviting countries to submit a net zero target, that it's basically committing to a date by when they will be carbon neutral, basically, where their emissions and their carbon sinks are going to be balanced. Climate Watch tracks all three of these commitments and really dives deeper into the NDCs. So just summarizing, Climate Watch is a data platform that gathers hundreds of thousands of data points that helps users take more informed decisions around climate. And now, jumping into the live demo section, here we are on the homepage of the Climate Watch platform. From here, we can access all the different modules that we offer. Covering all of them will take too much. So for today, I'm going to be focusing just on 3 main modules. The first one, let's say that we just saw this presentation from Andrew, and we know how the temperature is changing in any country, and want to dive deeper into one country in particular. For that, Climate Watch has country profile pages that you can access by going through this upper tab to where it says countries. And then from there, you can either scroll down through the list or simply hover over the map and select one country. In this case, let's say Chile. I saw from the maps that Andrew shared that the southern region of Chile country profile, what we can do, it's basically have a very summarized bird's eye view of what's the climate situation of the country. First, we give you some national context. So what are the total emissions of the country? What are emissions per capita, populations, and GDP per capita? That's basically so that if you are jumping from one country to the other, it helps you set the context of where the country stands. As you scroll down, you can see what are the key commitments that the country has submitted. In this case, we can see that Chile has submitted all of them. So different versions of their NDCs, a long-term strategy, and a net zero target. If you keep scrolling, we can see that out of the 7 indicators that we have, basically high-level indicators signaling whether the new NDC is more ambitious than the previous one. We can see that they have made progress on all of the sections that we're keeping track of. We can continue scrolling down and see the emissions of the country and how they break down by how they compare to other global emissions, and they break down internally. Right now, it isn't loading, but usually here you can see the breakdown by sector, just like you can see it in this other chart. And now very quickly, the other things that we offer in this quick summary of the climate commitments from the country, we have some details on sectoral emissions drivers from the country, key takeaways from each of the documents. So if you cannot read the entirety of all these documents, you can see from the latest NDC, what's the overall greenhouse gas emissions target that the country has, what's the target in the long-term strategy, and by when is the country committing to be net zero. You can also very quickly see if the 3 documents are aligned or if there's any gap in between them. We also cover information on adaptation and how those plans are covered into their NDCs, some data on natural hazard occurrence in the country. And then, even though Climate Watch focuses really at the national level, we do have some sub-national information, such as, for example, how many cities have committed to the Global Covenant of Mayors, and how many companies have signed a science-based target, basically indicating what's the commitment sub-nationally to promote more sustainably, to promote sustainable practices within cities and within companies. And furthermore, some information on green jobs and energy costs. Now, this module in particular, it's going to be very helpful if you're going to have this very top-line level assessment of where a country stands. Now, if you want to dive deeper into what is your country, what is any country committing to do in terms of climate policies, you can go to the commitment section and then to the Explore NDC module. Now, if you remember from the three colors and the three documents I just showed, NDCs are really the largest document that we cover, and also the one that has the most information and detail, really on what the country is committing to do. I had it already preloaded here. In the Explore National Intermittent Contribution module, as we scroll down, you can see that we have a couple of drop-down boxes. So here are basically filters that you can use to find out the indicator that you might be most interested in. Our data team analyzes more than 150 indicators consistently for all countries in the world and for all versions of NDCs. So that allows you to easily compare between versions and countries what each nation is proposing on all of these topics. Having a long list of 150 indicators will be quite complicated to navigate. So we group them into different categories and then indicators grouping too. For example, if you're talking about climate change, we know that one of the biggest contributors to climate change is the burning of fossil fuels. So we can ask ourselves, what is my country or any country doing to promote, for example, renewable energies? So taking that example, in this case, we can go to the categories and then scroll down. You can see that we can have information on loss and damage, mitigation, finance, and support. You can see that the map, it's automatically changed. And here we have different categories for the indicators. Within mitigation measures, we can explore other transport industries, and then renewable energy will fall first within energy. Energy is a very important sector for all countries. So it's not surprising that here in the map, we can see that 155 parties that don't have a specified measure, and we can see what's the share of global emissions from those countries. Also, if we keep scrolling down, you can see basically the same information, but in a table format. And you can see also not only if the country has a specified mitigation measure on energy, but more in detail, what specific measures within energy. You can see Algeria in this case has measures on biofuels, renewable energy, geothermal, solar, and waste to energy. You can also explore more if you hover over the map, but in this case, we're really focused on renewable energies. So you can go one step further through this arrow that we see here. It takes us to the sub-indicators. We scroll down and we go to renewable energies. Renewable energies, in this case, let's just do general. Here we see fewer parties mention renewable energies, but still, we can dive deeper and see what they offer. If we want to know specifically if there's a target within the country or what they're proposing, we can simply click on any country that had selected that information. In this case, I think I had it already loaded for Mexico. It's going to take you to this page where it's going to show first a summary of the NDC with the contribution type, GHG emissions target, and the non-GHG targets. But then all the 100 indicators are split in between these 4 different tabs. Now, renewable energy will be within sectoral information, sectoral mitigation measures, and here we go. Long list of everything that it's included as a sectoral measure. We go to renewable energy. In this case, we can explore, for example, solar. So what is Mexico's government proposing in terms of solar? And you can see here that in addition to meeting climate change goals, clean energy is promoted to support universal access to energy, for example, through rural electrification projects and home pilot solar. We can see there's no specific target to this, but at least it is included into the NDC. And just likewise, we can explore any other topic, such as, for example, hydrogen or anything else that you see on this table. One thing to mention is that all the text that you see that we pick up from NDCs, it's a textual excerpt from the NDC text. We don't do any interpretations or paraphrasing of what the NDC says. We simply cut and paste in here so you can have the most unbiased version of the information that a country is providing. Now, in the few more minutes that I have, there's one more module that I would like to quickly show you, and that's the GHG emissions module. Now, if you're interested in knowing what are the emissions from each country and what are the different gases and sectors, this would be the module to use. This is also one of our most popular ones. We have this one already loaded. So how to use this page. Once again, you can see that we have several drop-down boxes where you can filter down the data that we have. We have a line chart. This is a time slider that can filter the time that you're interested in. And once again, every time we have a chart, you can see a table view underneath. Now, the first drop-down box that we have, it's the data source. And usually, also with the first questions that we get is, what's the data source? Or what's the best data source for greenhouse gas emissions inventory data I can use? And unfortunately, the answer is that it really depends. It's not that there's one data source that it's better than others. It really depends on what use and what's your need for using the data. By default, we give you the Climate Watch data, which we develop in-house within WRI, but we also gather data from PIC, official inventory data from countries, and also data from GCP, which are independent research institutions, and these two from UNFCCC are the ones submitted by countries. Now, why do I say that it depends? We put together a table in this Learn More in FAQ, where you can find out more about what are the differences between Climate Watch and the other sources. But basically, you can see, for example, Climate Watch, our data, it's the most comprehensive in terms of sectors and gases. You can see from Climate Watch, if you click in sectors and subsectors, that we cover all sectors: agriculture, industrial processes, waste, land use energy, land use change and forestry, and energy. And even within energy, we have subsectors for these ones, which is not the case for most other data sources. And we also cover most of the gases. That being said, our data, even though it's the most comprehensive, it goes all the way back to 1990 and to 2021, which means if you're looking for the most recent data, in that case, I'll recommend you, for example, GCP data that goes all the way to 2022. So it's 1 year more updated than what we have. However, GCP only have data for CO2 emissions. So it's always a give and take, and you need to assess what's your need. If you're looking into historical emissions, for example, then I'll recommend PIC because their data source goes all the way back to 1850. And if I'm working on a report, for example, on cumulative emissions or historical responsibilities of emissions from any country, if you use this one, you're gonna have a much larger time span to cover. One more thing to mention for this is that you can filter either by location. We not only have countries, but also different geographical and economic groups that you can search from. You can filter down by the sectors you're interested in, the type of gases, and we also provide some pre-made calculations, either emissions per capita, per GDP, cumulative across available years, and you can visualize this data in different ways. For example, you can also see it in a 100% stack area chart. And all the data that we have is publicly available and free for you to use. And you can download it by clicking on the download data. You can download it either as an image or as a CSV. We're just going to ask you to tell us how you intend to use the data, but then it's really free after that. So I could continue talking for hours, but I want to pause now for a second. Please share any questions that you have in the chat box. We're going to be covering them at the end of the session. But next, I want to pass the floor to my colleague, Cathline, who's going to talk about System Change Lab. So Cathline, all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen and then we'll get started. Okay, so thank you, Leo and Andrew, for this really wonderful introduction into the world of attribution and target setting data. Tracking and mobilizing action is made possible by our understanding of how climate change is impacting our world and what countries and international government organizations are doing to prevent its worst damages. As a quick introduction to myself, my name is Cathline Nagel, and I am the Senior Product Manager for Systems Change Lab. I guide our product strategy to ensure our data platform meets the needs of both our users and our research. I'm going to start today with a brief introduction into Systems Change Lab and systems thinking in general. And then from there, I will provide a really quick demo of our platform and data, showing you how to best use it. After my demonstration, we will go into our Q&A session, which will be led by the wonderful Bryn. Okay, so to start, we're going to talk about what is system change. We define it as a shifting the component parts of a system and a pattern of interactions between these parts to ultimately form a new system that behaves in a qualitatively different way. We live in a world that's built of countless interconnected systems. There are small ones like our own bodies or our local bus system, but there are also larger ones like our power systems, our governments, and our ecological systems. To limit global temperature rise, halt biodiversity loss, and build a fairer economy, nearly every major system will need to transform. This includes how we power our economies, how we grow food, how we build cities, how we conserve nature, and beyond. And additionally, cross-cutting transitions need to occur in our political, social, and economic systems. Systems Change Lab was created in response to this urgent need for a systemic lens, and we've identified 3 pillars that help us do so, which you can see here. The first of which is going to be our monitoring pillar, followed by learning and sharing, and then nudging and campaigning. Our open source data platform, which is what I oversee, as well as our State of Climate Action Report, aims to accomplish our first pillar by monitoring progress towards the transformational shifts that are needed to protect both people and the planet. You can kind of picture our data platform as a virtual situation room that showcases research and analyses, interactive dashboards, and data visualizations. We created our platform to highlight and track all of the crucial changes that are happening in our world. So on our platform, we have identified 15 interconnected systems. As of today, it's not switching. As of today, we have 7 systems that are currently published on our platform. Those include our power, industry, transport, finance, technological carbon removal, circular economy, and city systems. Our demonstration today is only going to show a subset of these, but I will show you how to navigate to each of our system pages so that you can explore afterwards. So when you refer to our systems or you're thinking about systems change, a keyword that I want you to remember is this use of interconnected. And you'll see in this slide, I have a little question mark beside it, because this depiction that we have of our systems here doesn't actually show what those interconnections are, right? It looks a little bit siloed. All of our systems are in their own little bubbles. The actual reality is that our world kind of looks like this, right? When we use our systems thinking, methods, we know that creating change is both complex and interconnected. There's that word. We can't change one system without changing others. And we also know that there are no silver bullet solutions. So for example, a shift to electric vehicles is not effective at reducing emissions without a shift to clean energy as well. As you're soon going to see on our platform, we try to make sense of all of that spaghetti, which I just showed you. And so on the platform itself, we've identified more than 70 critical shifts that need to work together to disrupt the status quo and create the system-wide change that I've been discussing. These shifts range from phasing out coal and unabated fossil gas, to extending financial services and underserved communities, to restoring deforested integrated land. And within each shift, System Change Lab measures how much progress has been made towards our global 2030 and 2050 science-based targets. Each of our targets identified is analyzed and assigned a status ranging from on track to moving in the wrong direction. As an important note, our targets and our outcomes don't actually tell the whole story of systems change. There are many other factors that can drive or prevent it. So within each shift, we've also identified key enablers and barriers. These enablers and barriers fall into one of the 5 categories, which you see here on the screen. They can range from innovations in technology to behavior change to regulations and incentives. So with that, I'm now going to demonstrate where you can find all of this information on our platform and how to use some of our key features. As a reminder, you can submit any questions using the Q&A feature in this Zoom call, and we'll address as many of them as possible afterwards. And lastly, if you're interested in learning more about our upcoming systems launches, such as our building system, which is launching next month, new features, when we update data, or if you want to just learn about news and events that we are hosting, feel free to check out our newsletter, which we will link in the chat. Okay, so now hold one moment, please, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can go through the platform together. If you'd like, on your end, you can go to systemschangelab.org and explore along with me. So right when you go onto our platform, you're going to see 2 key things. The first is going to be our systems navigation, which is on the left side of the page. This is where you will be able to quickly access all of our published systems on the site. And at the top, just to call out a few links, we have a link to our data dashboard, which includes our pinwheel and our grid. We have quick links to our methodology and our publications, such as the state of climate action and our technical notes. Licensing information and downloading our data are up here as well. And then we also have quick links to our news and events. And if you need to contact us with any questions, there is a button to do so as well. On the rest of our homepage, we provide this introductory information on Systems Change Lab and the terms that we use. So the shifts, the targets, what our statuses mean, and our enablers and barriers, all of that is here and is available for your use in case you need a refresher on any of it. So without further ado, we're actually going to go into our city system, which launched, I believe, last month. So it's our most recent system. All of our system pages are structured in the exact same way. So right at the top, you're going to see a highlights section, which is basically, if you do not have time to read our system page or anything about it, these are the key takeaways that we want you to have, including the sources in which we got them from. On the right-hand side, we have just like a really quick navigation tool to access the shift pages that are within the system. So you can see here for cities, we have 3 shifts that are needed to transform the system. And then here are links to all of the shifts within it. If you continue to scroll down, we also provide a roll-up summary of the total number of outcome indicators and enablers and barriers that exist within the system. And then we also include a write-up that talks about the current state of the system and as well what changes need to be implemented by a given date. If you keep scrolling down, the last key section here on our system page is going to be that formal introduction to the shifts that we've identified. They include just a brief summary of what the shift represents. We show just a quick little view of the outcome indicators that are associated with this shift. And then we also give you the ability to click into the shift page by either clicking the Explore button or by clicking the shift name itself. So we are going to go ahead and explore our shift on increasing access to resilient and affordable urban services. And so when you land on a shift page such as this, 2 things to call out really quick. First off is if you're ever forgetting like what system page you just came from or what system a shift is associated with, right above the shift name, you actually can see the association. And then in addition, right at the top, we have our breadcrumb, which will show you, again, here's the shift name, and here's the system that it is part of. Just like our system page, we have a highlights section. These are the key takeaways of the shift itself and quick links to the other shifts within the system. We have that roll-up of the total number of indicators that were identified for the shift, as well as a write-up that explains like what the shift is in a little bit more detail than you saw on the system page. If you scroll down a little bit more, here we have our data insights. This is really your first view into the data that is available within this shift. We separate our data insights by our outcomes, which have a status associated with it. And then we also have our enablers and barriers, which have an enabler category. From here, there's a few things you could do. The first thing you could do is you could just keep scrolling down the page and get into really like the meat and potatoes of our platform. You could also, if you're curious about one specific indicator, you could go ahead and click Explore Data, and it will take you down the page directly to a larger version of the chart and an explanation of what the indicator is. And I will show you that in one moment. Or you could actually just click our little metadata button, which is that top right tooltip that I'm hovering over here. And you could learn more about the key terms that we have for this indicator, the historical data methodology, the sources that were used, our target methodology, all of that key metadata that you might want to know. It exists for every single indicator. So one of the other things that we include in this little metadata window is the ability to actually see what those connections are. So if we have an indicator that appears in multiple systems, we actually share that information and we link directly to it. So we are going to now explore one of our indicators just to see a quick look at what this looks like on our platform. The structure is the same for all of the indicators on our site. So okay, here we go. So we have a large chart, and right below it, we have just a description of what this indicator is, excuse me, and what the current trends are. If you were to look at the large chart, it really depends on what data is available, but we do have multiple chart views. You can see timeline here. We have a yearly change map and a table. Just like the small charts that we saw above, there is a little tooltip icon so that you can continue to access the metadata. And we also have just a few key buttons at the bottom in case you want to share or save it for later. So the first is going to be an embed button. This allows you to paste this chart on any other platform, essentially. So if you want to embed our chart on a blog post, this is how you could do that. You can also download an image of the chart that you're currently looking at using this download button. And you can also share a link directly to this chart. So if you want to send it to your friends or you want to bookmark it, it will copy the direct URL to this chart to your clipboard. So you can do whatever you would like with it. Our timeline view itself shows you the historical data on a global scale. If targets are available, we will show what the target is, and we will also show what the current trend is for meeting this target. If we have country level data available, which is as granular as we will get on Systems Change Lab, you can click our country drop-down menu and you can compare the data of up to 10 countries, as you can see here. And it also has as much historical data as we were able to collect. Did not mean to close that. Continuing on. So for our yearly change chart, similarly, we default to world data first, and this shows percent change over the previous year. You can also do this for other countries as well. So I know we were talking about Chile for the other presentations. So you could go ahead and see, oh, well, look at this, there's 0% change. But if you look at Argentina, perhaps you will see that it actually does have a change throughout the years. If you were to go to our map view, you have an interactive timeline view of just how the data is changing throughout the globe over all of the years we have collected. You can also zoom in on a specific country and just see how it's been performing. So if you don't like that eagle eye view of everything, you can focus in on whatever region or country interests you the most. We also offer a more granular view of that, which is our table view. And in this view, there are a couple really neat things I just want to call out because they're a little bit hidden. The first of which is that our global data is always pinned to the top row, so you have that as a reference point. You can sort our countries based on like A to Z order or Z to A order by just clicking the location column header. You can also sort our annual data from lowest to highest value or highest to lowest value by just clicking the year you're interested in. I'm now going to take you over to our dashboard. So I'm going to scroll to the top of the page, hover over the data dashboard button, and we're going to go right into our pinwheel. Our pinwheel provides that eagle-eye view of all of the outcome indicators and the progress that we've assessed on a global scale for our published systems. You could go ahead and click any of our systems and you can actually go directly to the indicators if you want to read more or see the full charts, and you can just explore other shifts. Additionally, if you want to just have a tour of the page, you can click the Tour This Page button and it'll actually give you a full-on walkthrough of how this feature works. Similarly, we have a grid view. This has a lot more features and interactiveness than the pinwheel. But one of the really wonderful things about our grid view is that you can actually start to see the connections between systems, either using common key terms or just by seeing the relationship that indicators have to one another. And just like the pinwheel, we do have that Tour This Page feature if you want to go and have a little bit of a more in-depth tutorial about how things work. On the grid itself, we have the ability to filter by systems. We have the ability to filter by country, and this is specifically indicators that have country level data available. Not all of our indicators do. We focus primarily on global data first, but if you're interested in seeing how many indicators have data for Argentina or Botswana, you could go ahead and do that, and you can sort by outcomes and enablers and barriers. And then last but not least, if you want to look at our downloadable data, you can click Download Data at the top of the page. You can download either all of our data, or you can go ahead and search by a term such as electricity if you're curious. And you can go ahead and download whatever indicators you're interested in. Lastly, if you are exploring our website after this presentation and you have any questions, we do have an option to contact us. Our contact@systemschangelab.org email is perfect if you have just general usability questions, or if you have any features or bugs that you find. Always happy to receive those and improve our platform. And then if you have any data inquiries or you have suggestions on data sets that we can use that are open source, feel free to email us at data@systemschangelab.org. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Bryn, who's going to lead us through the Q&A session. Thank you, Bryn.
Thank you, Cathline. I'm really excited to be able to ask you guys some of these wonderful questions that have been submitted during your great presentations. I think you got people really excited to talk about climate data. So without further ado, I'll get right into it. I also want to flag, as Cathline mentioned, I think all of these platforms have really great opportunities for you to reach out and contact with questions, concerns. So if we don't get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to answer your questions, point you to the right people to answer your questions. And you will receive the recording and the slides in an email after we close this webinar. So with that being said, I'll get started asking some great questions. The first question I'm going to ask is actually for Andrew. We'll start there since you gave the first presentation. We had someone ask in the Q&A if you have any suggestions as to how weather presenters can use attribution in daily or weekly forecasts to promote this climate discussion among the public.
Thank you for that question. So this is a big part of what Climate Central does, and it's something we've been working on for more than a decade to try to help the weather community, starting in the US, but increasingly internationally, to talk about climate change in an effective way. We really identified that they're trusted messengers, that people go to them because they want to know about things that are really important, about their health and safety. But also they're often kind of the science reporter at a station. So we've worked a lot with that community, and a lot of our materials have been built in partnership with them to help them tell the story in a way that works on air. So for the Climate Shift Index, we worked with a small group of them to help design both the scale and the graphics. And they've continued to advise us on that. We also have a really active group that subscribes to a KML service. So KML is a particular mapping data format that is used by the TV weather systems that broadcasters are using. And so we actually are able to deliver them the data in the format that they need, that makes it easier for them to put on air. And a couple of the uses that I've been most excited about are when they use them to talk about things beyond just the temperature itself. So last year we had a great example of somebody using that service. They added little fire icons in Canada and showed that the wildfires in Canada were popping up when the heat had a detectable climate fingerprint. And then we had another one who used that service to talk about how the decision to close or to cancel the Twin Cities Marathon in Minnesota in the spring or in the fall because it was too hot in Minnesota to run a marathon, that was related to climate change.
Thanks, Andrew. That's really great to hear some examples of how folks are already using your data to do just that. I've got a question for Leo here from the Q&A. How can we use Climate Watch's NDC trackers to track and inform action at the local level?
That's a great question. Thank you, Bryn. So the thing with Climate Watch is that NDCs happen at the national level. So really one of the questions that we get pretty often is, not only what our country is proposing, but also what's happening on the ground. And that's where Climate Watch can't really go that deeper because we depend on what countries are basically saying that they're going to do in their NDCs. However, I do think that NDCs do set up like such as like a North Star on what municipalities and cities can do, basically to be aligned with what the country is proposing. And not only to what the country is proposing, but also being even more ambitious than what's being proposed at the national level. I would say there are some other platforms that track what's going on at the city level. And for that, I cover very quickly the Global Covenant of Mayors, for which we have some data. So I highly suggest exploring them to know what's going on at the municipality level, for example.
Thanks, Leo. Yeah, Climate Watch, I agree, is such a great tool to hold governments accountable, and I think that's one of its main benefits, especially at the local level. Question for you, Cathline. We know that different experts and different stakeholders have varying views of what's needed to address climate change and biodiversity loss and equity. So how does the Systems Change Lab decide what shifts are needed for a given system?
That's a really great question. I actually, maybe I'll share my screen really fast, but for Systems Change Lab, we do provide this information for all of our published systems publicly. So if you were to go to our methodology page, which I'm going to share really quickly, you'll see that we have our technical note at the top. But if you're ever curious about how our system leads decide on that selection of shifts, we actually include explanations for all of them, including the sources that were used to create these systems as a whole. For our systems that are currently in progress, actually, and for our published systems, we go through pretty rigorous peer review. And not only do we do extensive peer review, but we also run this past quite a few key stakeholders from our varying partner organizations. So although we try to do our best on the first go, we do an annual review of all of our systems. And if we find that maybe the shifts aren't reflected as good as we want them to, or if there are changes that we think are necessary, we do try to update them to be as accurate as possible.
Thanks, Cathline. That's a great answer. And I agree, a great question. A question for everybody, and maybe we can just answer in the same order if that works for you all. Or jump in as you feel called to, but someone asked, what are the biggest data gaps in current climate research, and how can we work to address them?
So I'd say on the physical sciences side, I think anything involving water is really, really important, has huge impacts. Think about rainfall, flooding, drought. and it's not as well represented in the models as, for example, temperature is. So it's why it's harder to make attribution statements around precipitation. And then I think the other thing are quantitative impacts. So really being able to, I think we're moving beyond trying to convince people that global warming is real, at least in kind of the international and the science side. And the question is really like, what does it mean to live on a warming planet? What are the impacts we need to be watching out for, and how do we help help keep people safe and prepared?
Thank you. For me, I would say anything related to implementation data. So what's going on the ground level on any of the indicators that we're tracking. We bump into the issue that data, it might take some time, even years, to be updated. So we're always a little bit behind on what's being reported. However, and very specific to this question on the data gaps, our team put together this visualization. I think now has more than 120 climate data platforms that basically maps the space on adaptation, energy, and topics and different scales. And you can find here what are different data sources related to these topics. And by juxtaposition, you can also basically understand where are the gaps in terms of data, or wherever you see that there's nothing, for example, at the non-state actor level for forest and agriculture. I would say we've been working on this for quite some time. So if you want to find out more about these data gaps, you can go to our key visualizations page. So here at the top, key visualizations, and then it's the fourth one that we have. I can also share a link in the chat. Yeah, and pass it on to Cathline.
Thank you. So assessing the data gaps is actually something that we are actively doing on Systems Change Lab, and our hope is to have a V1 of our data gaps analysis on our platform, I believe before end of this year. In the meantime, the way that we try to approach data gaps and the challenges that we face is that under every single indicator in the little metadata window that I had showed, there is a section where we capture if we ran into challenges or if we weren't able to find comprehensive data. One of the key things that we really strive for on System Change Lab is providing open source data. If we are unable to find that, we actually just don't include the data on our platform at all. So there are some instances where data we found was not open source, but we do include a link to it in case you are willing to purchase the data for your own work. So those are currently the first really easy solutions that we try to do, but hoping to have a more comprehensive approach in the near future.
Thank you all. I think that's such an interesting piece of climate data, right? Is where is it missing? So I think those are really useful answers. I'll ask one more question to everyone, and that's how can policymakers make use of these data tools, whether that's to inform actual policy or to drive a platform towards something. How can they best use our platforms?
So I think for the attribution work, we've seen, for example, the work that World Weather Attribution does in their reports are often cited at the kind of the leadership level, at the kind of the national level, congressional level, Parliament in the UK. So those are directly important for both, I think, motivating responses to climate change, and then I think specifically they can help you disentangle some of the things that are coming externally from global climate change versus the, what went into a particular disaster that was due to kind of human decisions on the ground in that country. And so being able to pull these things apart, I think can be really valuable.
For us, I think one of the main roles of Climate Watch is really promoting transparency and accountability of countries. So I do think by very transparently and comprehensively covering all these different indicators and targets on what each country is proposing, I do think it's also part of our theory of change that policymakers are going to be able to see what their neighboring countries or other similar countries are doing in this vast array of indicators that we cover and sectoral measures, and ideally promote them to be more ambitious, and knowing that if they're not, there's going to be accountability methods and the civil society is going to be there, basically knowing what other countries are doing and basically pointing the fingers and asking for more if they don't ramp up their ambition.
So really quick on the Systems Change Lab side, Our goal is to help decision makers understand the connections between our systems and shifts in order to achieve climate and nature goals. We want them to be able to prioritize challenges and decide how to address them, through policies, regulations, investments, and other measures.
Great. Thank you all so much. I think this was just such a great overview of some of the wonderful climate data resources that are out there. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Keep an eye out for the recording of today's webinar in your email inboxes in the next couple of days. And again, if you have any questions that weren't answered, please follow up with us. We'd love to address your questions. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all, Andrew, Cathline, and Leo, for these wonderful presentations. That we're over time, so I'm going to close this out. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for including.
Thanks, everyone.